I was on a road trip for work, driving on a long highway to my next hotel. It was just some cheap hotel in a town I'd never heard of, but was right off the highway from my route. I drove on this empty road for hours, only seeing another car or two every once in a while, until at some point I saw a car's headlight coming up behind me. For the next 3 hours that I drove, this car stayed behind me on this massive empty highway. When I reached the exit for the hotel, pulled off and parked in the lot. Few seconds later, the car behind me did the same, parking on the other side of the hotel's parking lot. It was a really big coincidence for them to have been behind me for 3 hours and have the same destination as me, but I tried to not overcomplicate it and considered it some strange luck. On the outside, this hotel was not very attractive. It was old and small, and it was the only building off the highway. No other restaurants or houses or anything. I was under the impression when I booked it that it was in a town, but I guess I was wrong. I got out and grabbed my bag and went up to the front desk inside the building. The woman at the front desk checked me in, giving me a key card to my room. For how old the place looked, both inside and out, I was half surprised they even had key card doors and not physical lock. I walked down to the end of the hallway on the first floor, going up to my room and scanning the card multiple times before it finally worked. It was old-fashioned and very small, but it looked clean and taken care of, which was all I was concerned about. I set everything down and started unpacking what I needed for the night, and just moments later, there was a knock on my door. I looked out the peephole and saw a man standing in the hallway. I'd never seen him before, and he didn't look like he worked for the hotel. I chose to ignore him and not answer the door. I don't know, it just felt like the safer option, considering the empty hotel right next to the empty highway. Whatever he wanted couldn't have been important anyways, because he didn't knock again after that. I finished up what I was doing and showered, and got in bed. I turned on the TV and watched one of the random free movies they had, then fell asleep sometime around 12 or 1 a.m. When I woke up, the room was completely dark, and I was extremely tired. In the back of my head, I was hearing this beeping sound, ringing over and over as I was in between being awake and asleep. All of a sudden, my eyes widened and I snapped fully awake just as I understood what the sound was. I jumped out of bed and flicked on the lamp. The beeping stopped and was followed by footsteps sprinting down the hallway. I ran over to the door and swung it open, looking down the hall, but I must have barely missed him. A few seconds later, the woman from the front desk showed up at the end of the hallway, looking nervously down at me. I asked her if she saw anyone running, and she nodded, saying a man just ran out into the parking lot. I looked out and saw a man getting into a car, the same one that was behind me on the highway. He backed out and drove away, squeaking his tires from leaving so fast and dangerously entering back onto the highway. I asked the woman for more details, and she said he had just walked in a few minutes ago and went right down the hall, so she assumed he had a room already. Then a minute later, she saw him sprinting out. I told her that I woke up to the sound of a key card trying to unlock my door. Knowing my key card took a few tries to work, it made me terrified to think that he may have somehow had the right one and could have been a couple more attempts from entering. The fact that he even had a key card was terrifying. To keep things short, police weren't too helpful and the man was never found. I did some research on my own though, and found some people talking about fake universal key cards that can work with some random hotel doors, which was unsettling to know about. I don't know what that man was trying to do, or exactly how everything happened that night, but I won't be staying at any more hotels for a long time. I work at a family-owned hotel in my town. Despite its small and rather less luxurious appearance when compared to other big-name hotels, we actually get decent business. It's nothing crazy, but there aren't a lot of other hotels in our town, so most people only have a couple options to pick from. During summer and winter, we get a lot of bookings. In spring and fall, it slows down to just a few bookings a night, and rarely, no bookings at all. This happened last spring, when our hotel only had a handful of people staying with us. I was working my normal shift of 6 to 2 a.m., and just around 11, a man walked through the front entrance with a large rolling suitcase. He looked normal, and while he was kind and soft-spoken, he seemed very tired, like he'd maybe just gotten off a long plane ride. He asked for a one-night stay, with the room on the first floor at the end if possible, and while we don't always take these kinds of requests, I allowed it because it wasn't busy. He thanked me and walked down the hallway, and I continued with standing at the desk and organizing papers. But then another man walked in. He carried no luggage or bags, and looked tired as well, but was much less friendly. He almost demanded a room, wanting it next to the man who'd just come in before him, saying they were friends on a trip together. This was a normal request we'd get sometimes, although usually the groups staying next to each other would come in together. But since I'd given the other man his request, I felt like I had to with this man as well. I didn't see any reason for him to be lying, or any reason for it to be a problem. I gave him the room at the end of the hall, next to the other man, and he walked off. I did some more work, then sat down and relaxed for a while, snacking on some lunch I brought and scrolling through the news on my phone. After about an hour, the desk phone started ringing. I got up and checked, seeing it was a room number, not an outside caller. I answered and started talking, but only a second in, they hung up. I didn't hear any voices or anything, only a shuffling sound just before they ended the call. I figured they accidentally called or decided they didn't need anything, but I still checked the room number and noticed it was the one I'd given to the kind man who'd walked in about an hour ago. Another couple minutes passed before a thud echoed down the hallway. I stepped around the counter and looked, not seeing anyone. For a noise to have traveled that far and literally echo in the building, it had to be something really loud, either breaking or falling over or something like that. I went back to the desk and redialed the room number that had just called. It rang for a second, but then they rejected it. I looked down the hall once more, but didn't know what else to do. If it was something bad, they would have called or come up to tell me, so I just left it at that. 30 minutes passed of no further sounds or calls until I heard someone coming down the hallway. I looked up to see the other man, the less friendly one, walking up to the counter. He said he needed to leave early, so I confirmed his checkout and he left. I went home that night with a strange feeling in my gut, and I wasn't so sure why. It wasn't until days had passed that I understood. The other man staying there never checked out, and when the room was searched, they found his suitcase and belongings, but he wasn't there. No trace of him at all. We tried to track down the other man who claimed to be with him, but he was also untraceable, having no matches to the name, address, and number he'd provided. It's unclear if he was involved, but obviously I think he was. However, I don't know how he could have gotten rid of the other man if he had done something. I still work at the hotel, but no more evidence has surfaced, and both men are still missing to this day. This happened just a month ago. I was moving across a few states to a new apartment and stopped at a motel overnight. I didn't plan the entire route or which motel I would stay at. I just went with the closest one after I started getting sleepy. I'd never stayed at a motel before, but when I pulled in, it was about how I would have expected it to be. It was in the middle of the woods off the side of the road and was a bit run down looking and not somewhere I'd want to spend more than a night at. The parking spots were all empty, not even one car. I wasn't even sure how the worker at the front desk had gotten there. I got a room though and walked down to my door and went inside. Again, it was run down and kind of gross, but it was better than nothing, I guess. I was gonna shower, but the tub was really filthy, so I pretty much went right to bed. I laid down and tried to get comfortable, but before I even turned off the lamp, I heard an odd noise from outside the room. Door handles shaking, coming from a few rooms down. Then again, but closer. Someone was going down the line of doors and trying each door handle, like they were trying to see if any of them were open or unlocked. They got to my door and tried it as well, and after a short pause, they continued moving down the line. It was probably the strangest thing I'd seen in a while, and I had no clue why anyone would be doing that, unless maybe they were looking to score a free room. I laid back down and closed my eyes, only to be disturbed again by someone banging on my door. It sounded almost like they were punching the door. I got up and realized the door had no way of seeing outside, so I flipped the latch over and opened it a crack. A man was standing there with a grim look and seemed frustrated about something. He was older, maybe mid-40s, with longish hair and a beard. "What's your problem?" I said, upset about the way he banged on my door. The man gave me a cold look and asked an unusual question. "You paid for this room?" I looked at him confused and said yeah, but he gave me a questioning response, like he didn't think I did. He asked me to come with him to the service counter to get it figured out, because he was told that this was his room. The situation already started out strange, but this had me even more puzzled. There were no other cars here, and likely nobody else staying at the motel, so the possibility of us accidentally being given the same room within just a few minutes was nearly zero, and they probably would have had another key to the room if they were telling the truth. The guy asked me again in an aggressive tone to come out, but I'd already decided I wasn't leaving the room. I started to close the door, but the guy slammed his body against it to prevent me from shutting it fully. In an instant, another guy came from around the wall with some tool that he was putting against the lock, trying to unlatch it. All I could do was press up against the door and try to push it close, but the force of both men pushing was overpowering me. In the chaos, the door moving knocked the tool out of his hand, and when both of them looked down, I slammed the door shut. After a few more hits at the door, their departing footsteps gave me relief, and I called 911. What's crazy is that they didn't have a car. Police found their shoe prints going straight into the woods behind the motel, leading to nothing but trees and dirt. It's not known what they were plotting aside from breaking into my room, but seeing as they knew all the other rooms were vacant and still went for me, it could not have been good. I hope that if it did go the other way, it would have been a quick robbery and nothing more, but I can't say I truly believe that. My family lives across the states in a small house. Try to visit often, and I usually get a lot of vacation time from my work. The drive is something I find relaxing, so I don't mind the extra couple days it takes to get there. Most of the time, I try to stay at one hotel or motel along the way. When I do, I just check in, sleep, and get back on the road as soon as I'm able. It's mainly because the areas along the drive are bare and run down, usually in the middle of nowhere. I find it hard to feel safe since I'm not used to being in those kinds of areas. Last year, I took the same road trip I always did to my parents' house during the holiday season. I started my drive early, I want to say around 1 or 2 a.m., and drove for almost 20 hours straight, aside from stopping for food and coffee a few times. By then it was 11 p.m., and I was exhausted and struggling to stay awake behind the wheel. I was just under 8 hours away, but I couldn't go much further. I was in the middle of nowhere, so whatever the next possible place to stay at was, I planned on taking it. About 20 minutes further, turned off into a small town. Pretty much just had a motel and gas station, but that was all I needed. I pulled into the mostly empty parking lot and walked over to the front desk. Older lady greeted me and made small talk. Then I got a room and headed back to my car so I could park closer to the door. I was extremely exhausted and left all of my stuff in the car and just went inside. I didn't care about the room at all. I just went inside and immediately got in the shower so I could get ready for bed as soon as possible. During my quick 5-minute shower, I heard a few tapping sounds. They sounded like they were from outside though, maybe a tree branch knocking against the building. I thought nothing of it and got out, putting on the same comfortable clothes I was wearing, and then got in bed. I set an alarm on my phone so I wouldn't oversleep, and finally reached for the lamp and turned off the light. Being at an old, run-down motel in the middle of nowhere seemed irrelevant compared to how tired I was, so I fell asleep without trouble. Though I didn't stay asleep for long. I jumped awake, hearing something move in the darkness surrounding the bed. I sat up, staring toward the front door, but I could barely see anything. I was too scared to move and reach for the light, afraid of what I might see. It wasn't long before I heard something from the other side of the bed, outside the window. My heart was racing, and I could feel myself starting to sweat, as I was wide awake at this point. I quickly turned back around and switched on the light. The room was empty. Nothing seemed out of place, till I noticed the closet door was cracked open. Everything was going through my mind, trying to understand every possibility. "Hello?" I decided to call out, but there was no response. Feeling like I may have just scared myself for no reason, I got up and slowly walked towards the closet. When I pulled the closet door more open, I was confused. A large bag was wedged between the back of the closet and the door, falling to the ground as I opened it further. Looking around, there was actually a whole stash of luggage. Clothes, bags, appliances, all clearly belonging to someone, not the typical stuff you would see at a motel. While I was looking at all this stuff, I suddenly heard the window slam shut by my bed, followed by footsteps running away. I shivered and froze, then took this chance to grab my phone from the nightstand and run out to my car. Almost just as I got inside and turned the car on, I looked up and made eye contact with a man standing right by the door to the room. He looked at me for a second, then rushed inside and grabbed one of the large bags from the closet and sprinted off behind the building. I was terrified and quickly drove closer to the front office, then ran inside to tell the woman what had happened. She contacted the police immediately and locked us both inside the office until they arrived. What we found out next was confusing, and the information came out over multiple weeks, but I'll try to explain it the best I can. The remaining bags in the closet were identified, as they were found to belong to several individuals who were robbed within the past month at several different motel locations in the surrounding area. It's likely that the man was using the room I was in as a place to temporarily stash the belongings, using the unlocked window to access the room. One of those bags, however, belonged to a young woman who was reported missing just a few weeks prior. The officers believe the crimes are connected. But all the reported bags that were stolen were found inside that closet, so the bag that the man ran inside to grab was not accounted for. They questioned me on it multiple times, making sure I was confident that I saw him run out with another bag, and asking me the approximate size of it and everything. My curiosity has really kept my mind from being able to forget that night, as I wonder what he planned on doing when he was outside the window while I was sleeping. I knew it was closed when I went to bed, so he had to have opened it while I was asleep, which is even creepier. I also wonder what was in that one bag that was so important that he needed to grab it before running off. I don't go on many vacations, nor do I stay at hotels often. Last year, I had a problem occur in my small house that required me to be away for several days for it to be fixed. Given the circumstances, I had to book a hotel nearby and stay there until further notice. I wasn't happy about it. There wasn't anything I could do and nowhere else I could stay. I looked for the absolute cheapest hotel in the area, trying to save as much money as possible. The one I went with was 25 minutes away, but was half the price of the ones closer. Although I knew it was because the hotel was located in the lesser part of the town, the extra money saved more than made up for it in my mind. That was until I got there. The place was disgusting, at least on the outside. Trash was everywhere and the building was very clearly not taken care of. The pictures online only showed the rooms in the lobby, but they looked clean and somewhat nice, so I was a little bit confused. I grabbed my small suitcase from my back seat and walked inside. Immediately when entering, I was relieved. The lobby was very small, but it was nice and clean. I headed for the counter to check in, but nobody was standing there. I stood patiently for a minute, looking around the main room. It was very quiet and not a single person was anywhere. It was only 4 p.m., so I assumed people would be walking around or hanging out in the lobby. I took a few steps further into the hotel, came down the main hallway leading to the rooms. At the very end was a man, standing right outside a room door. After watching him for a few seconds, it was apparent that he was just facing the door, not moving or anything. Feeling uncomfortable, I backed up to the front counter again. Finally, a man came from outside and walked behind the counter. Honestly, he looked dead inside. He asked for my name and gave me the key card, then walked away. I glanced at the card, seeing the room number written with a marker in the corner. Given the low number, I knew it was on the first floor. I walked over to the hallway I was just at and looked at the directions for where the rooms were, and my stomach ached a bit when I realized it was down the hallway where I'd seen that man. Even worse, as I started making my way down, I realized it was at the end of the hallway, right where the man was standing. I couldn't tell if he was standing outside my exact room or not because of how far he was when I saw him, but it was creepy either way. Although I hadn't been to many hotels previously, I do remember the annoyance of the thin walls allowing you to hear every noise from every room. What was strange as I walked down the hall was that there was no noise coming from any room. No TVs were on, nobody was talking, no movement, nothing. Gave me chills, but when I reached my door, I quickly scanned the card and headed inside. Given everything, it was actually in good condition. It was very small and was clearly old. It was exactly what I expected of the cheap room. I laid my suitcase down on the floor, then took a look into the bathroom to make sure it was good, finally locked the door and sat on the couch. Not at all surprised, TV didn't work though, so I was left with just my phone. After an hour of trying to keep myself occupied, a knock came from the door. It startled me, given it was just a single knock, which sounded more like a hit. The door had no peephole, so when I got there, I flicked the safety latch over just in case and opened the door a crack. That same man from earlier was standing in the hallway, only a foot or so from the door. We made eye contact through the crack in the door. "Hi." "Yeah." Paused, waiting for him to tell me what, but he just stood there like he was waiting for me to say something. "Okay, man." That, I said, a way to show that I was clearly bothered by him. The strange man responded, claiming he was the previous person staying in my room and that he had accidentally left something important inside one of the drawers. I said okay and told him I would grab it real quick and began closing the door and turning around, but the man pushed the door back, slamming it against the safety latch. I looked back at him, my heart starting to race as I was getting a really bad feeling about this. "The top dresser door," the man muttered to me, then backed up, letting the door close. I turned back around, heading to the dresser, opening the top drawer. Inside, there was actually a small-sized box taped shut on the top. Picking it up, it was fairly light though. I mean, like it felt empty. I walked back over to the door and opened it, seeing the man still standing there. "This what you were looking for?" I asked. The man nodded and held his hand out. I went to slip the box through the crack in the door, but it was barely too big. I tried every possible angle, probably looking like an idiot, but it was just slightly too wide on every side. The man looked impatient. While I really didn't trust this place, at the moment I thought the guy had told the truth about leaving something behind, and I did see him standing by the door before, though I figured it'd be fine to open the door for a second just to hand him the box. As soon as I moved the latch over, the man rammed his body into the door, knocking me down and pulling a gun on me. He yelled at me to back up into the living room and stand against the wall. I was actually stunned at how loud he was screaming, thinking surely he would alarm everyone in the building. He grabbed my whole suitcase and continued looking around while holding the gun at me. Then, just when he was about to leave, he walked up to me, put the pistol just inches from my face, and stared me in the eyes. I was shaking in fear, staring into this man's rage-filled eyes, but after a few seconds, he backed up and ran away with my stuff. I stood in that same spot for probably a whole minute, staring at the ground. It happened so fast, it almost didn't even seem real. When I finally got myself together, I went outside my room and went straight to the front desk. The guy there was just casually standing there like he didn't hear anything, and nobody else was in sight. To sum everything up, nothing was done. He got away with all of my stuff, and honestly, every authority figure I talked to didn't seem scared or surprised in any way. They kind of just looked at me like I didn't even belong here anyways. I guess it was just normal, and they expect you to look out for yourself. The box was in fact empty though, and the whole thing was obviously just an interesting plot to rob those who stay at the hotel. Those last moments before the man ran away though, are what I keep thinking back to. The rage in his eyes, holding the gun up like he was ready to pull the trigger without thinking twice. Why didn't he? I only thought was that maybe he knew that if it was just a robbery, then nobody would come looking. I don't know, but I definitely won't be staying at a cheap hotel in a bad neighborhood ever again. This happened while I was on a work trip. I work for an insurance company, and we can win trips to our other two big locations, one of which happens to be in Miami. I won the trip and went with my boss and a few other people in the company. Most of the trip was spent doing work stuff during the day, and then at night we were left to do what we wanted, like go to the hotel pool, bars in town, and all that other stuff. It was the second to last night I was there, and I didn't have much to do the next day, so me and a coworker went out to a cool-looking bar on First Street. We took an Uber and got there around 11 p.m. Miami is a party city, and the nightlife there is amazing. The bar was packed, and it made me feel like I was in college again. I wasn't that old, but I'd been out of college for a few years now. My coworker gets us shots, and throughout the night we have some more, and he ends up inviting two girls to the table and buys them shots as well. He hits it off with one of them, and the other one seems to take a liking to me. I'd been single for quite some time, and work had taken over my life, so I was honestly just excited someone was showing interest in me. Plus I was on vacation, and she says she was too, so neither of us were expecting anything serious out of this. I thought she was really cool and extremely attractive, and throughout the night I offered to buy her drinks, but she bought her own, which I thought was really cool too. It was around 2 a.m. now, and she asked if I wanted to go back to her hotel, which I found out was only a 15-minute walk from mine. I agreed, but honestly was pretty nervous. I knew this girl was way out of my league, but I decided to have fun and take a chance. We Ubered back to her hotel, which was insanely nice by the way, and got to the room. I'll spare you the details, but events occurred and afterwards we ended up talking for a bit. After a while, I noticed she was starting to get glued to her phone, so I went to the bathroom to clean up and get dressed. But while I was in there, I heard a key card open the door to the room and was confused. It never mentioned that she was here with anyone, and I didn't see anyone else's stuff in the room either. That's when I heard a man's voice. My heart dropped to my stomach. I quickly got dressed and checked if I had everything. I had my phone and wallet, which were in my pants pocket, but my shoes were still out there. I decided I'd have to leave them, as I could not deal with whatever this is right now. While I was waiting for my time to slip out, I heard him ask why there's men's shoes by the bed. That's when I knew I was screwed. By the time I made the decision to make a run for it, there was a pounding on the bathroom door. Boom, boom, boom. It was one of those doors that slide open and doesn't really lock, so of course the cheap thing revealed me behind it. This guy was huge. I could not have been more unlucky if I tried. The cherry on top was he also had a gun and was pointing it right at me. He told me to get my shit and get out in the most calm voice that made everything 10 times scarier. I grabbed my shoes and left, my heart beating out of my chest. He closed the door behind me and then silence. I didn't hear any fighting or yelling or anything. That thought was weird, but I wasn't going to stay to find out. I got in the elevator and took my wallet out to get my key card. What do you know? All my cash was gone, my credit card, my debit card, even my gift cards were taken. I don't even know when she had the time to take all this stuff, how I didn't notice. I tried thinking back to the bar and going into the room, but the night had turned into a blur. I spent the next hour canceling my cards, pissed that for the rest of the trip I would have absolutely no money. Next day I told my boss and coworkers, who sympathized but also found it funny. And now that it's been a few years since that incident, I can look back and find the humor in it. But what stuck with me was one of my friends theorized it might have been a setup. That might not have been her boyfriend at all. She could have taken me back to the hotel, stole my stuff, and waited till I went to the bathroom for the guy to come in and scare me off before I noticed the money was gone. If that's the case, it would explain why I didn't hear any fighting after I left and why the guy wasn't more angry. I try not to think about it too hard, and anytime I go out, which isn't much anymore, I try to keep myself safer and make better decisions. I'm an older guy in my late 40s. For work, I'm part of a team that travels across the country to train employees at our company. The company pays for our travels and hotels, and while sometimes it does somewhat feel like a vacation, usually it doesn't. When traveling, we have to work long hours and basically spend the entire day in the office, leaving us just enough time to sleep at the hotel before waking up and going back to work. I was on one of these work trips and had been at a hotel for a few days. It was a Saturday night where I got out of work and got back to the hotel a little past 10. I walked inside and got in the elevator. The whole hotel was quiet. There wasn't anyone walking around in the lobby and nobody in the elevator. When I got to my floor, I stepped out and began walking down the hallway. At the end was a person. They were standing right in front of my door, or at least it looked like it, but I was too far to tell for sure. As I approached, the guy noticed me and walked away, going inside a room a few doors down. I got to my door and went in, wondering what he possibly could have been doing. I was sure he was either outside my room or the room next to mine, but I figured it had to be the other room. I forgot about it after a couple minutes and took a shower, then got in bed. I had another long day of work tomorrow, so I wasn't trying to overthink anything right before bed. I fell asleep, but woke up multiple times throughout the night, hearing someone walking outside my room. I even thought I heard them knocking once, but I wasn't sure if it was in my dream or if it was real. I got up in the morning, still tired, and went to work. I didn't get back to the hotel until late. I think around 9, but at least it was earlier than the previous night. When I walked up to my room, no one was in the hallway this time. I tossed my work bag on the couch and got in bed, but decided to watch some TV before sleeping. I reached for the remote on the nightstand and turned on some random show. I don't remember dozing off, but I must have really quickly, because I woke up just before 10 to the sound of my phone ringing. I looked over at the nightstand, but as I gained more consciousness, I realized the sound wasn't coming from next to me, and my phone wasn't even on. I snapped my head toward the closet next to the TV, and then the ringing was suddenly silenced. Cold chill ran through my body as I saw the slight movement of a shadow from the crack between the closet doors. I jumped out of bed full of adrenaline and ran out of the room, going straight to the stairs and running to the front desk. They called for security, who came a few minutes later and went into the room to search. And after 30 seconds, they came out holding a man, the same man I'd seen in the hallway before. I couldn't believe he didn't try to run away, but they said he was still in the closet. As far as I know, the guy had no idea who I was or anything, and didn't give any specific reasons as to why he broke into my room and hid in the closet. Knowing he was sitting in the closet at the end of the bed, probably watching me through the cracks, makes my body shake. I guess he was just crazy, but it terrifies me to think about what could have happened if his phone didn't ring. I lived in a small town in the mountains just outside of Salt Lake City for several years in my early 20s. During my time living there, I took up a job at the local hotel. I say the local hotel because it was the only hotel in the whole town. It was very small and family owned, though nothing nice or well established. Almost nobody visited the town aside from seeing friends or family because there was no other reason to be there. Anyway, this happened when I was 23 and working the overnight shift at this hotel. Since it was so small, having 12 rooms total, I was the only worker there during the night. I was sitting in the lounge room, which was just off to the side of the main entrance, when I saw the headlights of a car shine through the window as they pulled into the parking lot. I put my phone away and got up, not expecting anyone to check in tonight. I stood behind the front desk, waiting for them to come in. After a couple minutes, I was getting impatient and went back on my phone. Probably 30 minutes went by before someone finally walked through the doors. It was a man, looking around the same age as me, but he looked really tired. I welcomed him in. "Looks like you've had a long day of driving," I said, trying to start up some small talk, but he didn't respond. He pulled out his wallet and took out cash. "1 room. For the night," he said. I got him to sign in on the sheet and gave him the key to room 4, which was down the hall on the first floor. The man went straight to the room, bringing nothing but the small backpack he had with him. There was nobody else staying that night, so it was just me and him in the building. I knew he was probably just passing through and was tired from driving, but his attitude gave me an uncomfortable sense. Not to be creepy or anything, but I looked at the sign-in sheet he filled out and noticed he didn't put a last name, only an initial. His first name was Daniel, too, so it was about as generic as it could be. The hotel has never needed these sheets before, though, so having them filled out was pretty much pointless. I went back to the lounge and sat down, putting headphones in and watching a movie I had downloaded on my phone. About an hour in, something caught my attention. A muted thump came from down the hall, making the floor vibrate under me, like something had shaken the building. I took one earbud out, and just a second later, another thump came. I stood up and walked quickly to the end of the hall, seeing nothing. I knew it had to be the man, and my first thought was that maybe he had knocked something over or broken something by accident. I walked up to his door and knocked. "Sir, are you okay?" I called out, but there was no reply. I waited another few seconds, then leaned my head closer and listened more carefully, hearing faint breathing from the other side of the door. He was standing there, trying to be quiet. It really creeped me out, so I backed away and went to the front desk, staying more aware for the next little while. The rest of the night went by without sound or issue, but in the morning when checkout time came, he never came up to the front desk. There really wasn't any rush, so I let him have an extra hour before I began wondering if he'd even planned to leave. I knocked on his door, but there was no answer. Eventually, I got the spare key and unlocked the door, but it still wouldn't open. It would barely even budge, and I ended up having to call the owners. When we finally managed to force the door open, we found that the room's dresser was pushed in front of the door to keep us out. What we didn't find was the man. He wasn't in the room, but I never saw him leave the hotel through the only entrance and exit. His car was still in the parking lot too, which made it all the more confusing. We looked around the room some more, but didn't find anything else strange aside from the dresser that he used as a barricade. I think I actually would have been less creeped out if we found other strange things, but seeing everything else look normal just gave me chills. We never found out who the man was, where he went, or what he was doing at the hotel. Last year, I went on a long 10-day road trip. It wasn't to any single place. I just drove in a big loop, stopping at 5 or 6 different cities. I actually didn't book any hotels in advance because I wasn't sure exactly how long I would spend in each city or where I would want to take breaks during the drive, so I was relying on hotels allowing walk-ins. The first 5 nights I was able to find decent hotels on the course of my drives, but the 6th night I ran into some issues. I was driving between cities and felt my eyes getting heavy around 11 p.m. I wanted to keep going and get to the next major city and then sleep in a parking lot or something, but there was no way I could make it when I was so sleepy already. I pulled over and contacted a few big-name hotels that were on the way, but none of them were accepting walk-ins at the time. I was getting nervous, thinking I might have to park on the side of the road and sleep, which was obviously dangerous. But then I saw a sign for a hotel 10 miles ahead. I drove until I reached the building, then parked by the front. The hotel was small, looking more like a motel, being a single story with a bunch of rooms. There were a few other cars in the parking lot, but it was mostly empty. I got out and went up to the reception desk, asking the woman there if I could have a room. Luckily, they had one available, and she gave me a key card. I got my bag from the car and brought it to the room. It was really outdated, but for the price, it wasn't all that bad. But only a minute after I went inside, there was a knock at the door. I walked over and opened it a crack just to see who it was. There was a man mumbling something to himself, and right when he saw the door open, he pushed into it, trying to force himself into the room while still talking to himself. I put my arm out and stopped him, preventing the man from fully entering. He stopped talking and looked up at me as I told him to leave. After a second, he turned around and walked away. I made sure he actually left, then locked the door. It was really weird, but I didn't feel too threatened because I was sure it was just some crackhead who was lost. Stayed up another 15 minutes, then fell asleep. A couple hours into the night, I woke up to a knock on the door. I was immediately irritated, knowing it had to be that man from earlier. Having learned my lesson, I put the chain bolt on the door before cracking it open. It was a good thing I did, because the second I unlocked the door, the man rammed into it. He started yelling random sentences that made no sense. I backed up right away and called 911. The man didn't let up though. He continued slamming into the door, tried to break in. A minute into the chaos, the man shoved a knife between the door and tried cutting the chain. There was no way it could cut it, but it definitely horrified me to know that he had a knife with him. The yelling, banging, and cutting went on for several minutes, before it went quiet. Police showed up a while later, but the man was gone. I don't know what was wrong with him, or why he wanted to get inside my room so bad, but he definitely had some bad intentions. It may have just been because he was drugged up, but breaking into someone's room with a knife is horrifying. All it takes is one wrong move, like answering a door or leaving it unlocked, for someone like him to take advantage. I don't think he had something against me personally, but I still have this feeling sometimes like I'm being watched.